Now, for too long, the Zambesia region's wildlife conservation stories have been told by those that are not entirely in touch with the realities on the ground. To tackle this, our next panel will deep dive into how the conservation narrative can be dominated by the real stories from the front line and subsequently do justice to them on the world stage. Our panel will be led by Richard Madden of the Telegraph, Maggie Mutangiri of Travel Africa Network, and Yvonne Mtengwa of Travel Essence magazine. So Richard, I hand the word to you to kick off this extremely important conversation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm hopefully have unmuted myself. I think we're good. Just to say that I am a journalist based in the UK, and as Luke has just said, Yvonne and Maggie work at opposite ends of the African continent, and we're all journalists, travel writers, and Maggie is runs a broadcast TV channel. And as Luke has just said, what we need to be doing as journalists is find ways in which we can be telling these extraordinary stories around conservation, so that people actually fully understand both I was going to use the word horror, because really it is that in many ways of what's going on the ground, but also about the hope for the future of what can be done about that. And a lot of it is telling these very personal human stories, and connecting people to the people on the ground, the communities that Yvonne and Marilyn have spoken about, that are so important to long-term conversation. And of course the rangers and who work actually on the ground and put their lives, risk their lives every single day. Just a little bit of background about me, because I think it's just important to understand how somebody in the UK has this connection to Africa. I went to Africa as a 16-year-old, actually, to Uganda. It was the first time I went there. When General Amin was in power, I actually met the man, but that's another story. But I visited Merchant Falls National Park and Queen Elizabeth National Park back in those far off days. And I just remember them teeming with wildlife, absolutely teeming with wildlife. And now, in more recent times, I went on to take an interest in conservation because I was brought up in the countryside here in the UK, but also it was Africa that inspired me still further. And I have been involved in conservation in the UK as an advisor to Friends of the Earth. And in the last 20 years have written travel stories and about wildlife for various newspapers and magazines, in particular the Daily Telegraph, with a specialization in wildlife. And as part of doing that, I also went to Africa with my wife and ran a safari lodge called Greystoke Mahali on Lake Tanganyika. And subsequently was hugely privileged to then spend time in the bush around many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the things that came out of that was actually feeling and seeing so much of the devastation that has been caused by, well, so many issues that have caused these declines in wildlife populations. And we're talking about the big five. We're talking about elephants, we're talking about rhino, and also just to see what is required to keep these populations healthy. And tourism, about which around the world we hear so much about, a lot of it negative, but as Yvonne was saying, is if it's done the right way, it is absolutely crucial to the long-term survival of these species. because it is the money that comes in through tourism that actually goes to supporting the wildlife rangers and the communities that actually live around the national parks. Because if those communities are not funded properly, if they're not employed, if they do not feel ownership of the animals, that they're their animals, if they do not feel that, and they're not just the property of rich people who come in from outside, then they will fall prey to these syndicates of poachers who will pay them large amounts of money to tell them where the rhino are located or whatever. And you can understand that because they want primarily to look after their children and their families. And so one of the things that we need to tell the stories of is the stories of the people living in the communities, their families, and the rangers that come from these communities. And when I've been out in Africa, I found myself finding more and more the stories I find so fascinating is the story of rangers on the ground, and the stories of visiting local schools and seeing how money from tourism can go into education so that the local children feel an actual connection to the animals, to their animals. And also how it makes them want to protect those animals. And if they see that they are getting an income from those animals that come from tourism, you start to bring up a virtuous circle that can continue. And of course, the pandemic has done untold damage to this. And we very quickly need to revive that. And it's the job of us as journalists to tell the story of local people, to tell the stories of what is going on in the ground and the great conservation efforts that are going on. And so everybody can actually contribute to what we all need to keep the whole ecosystem of the planet actually functioning properly. So there we go. I have built up a connection of journalists in the UK, broadcast journalists across the BBC, across ITN, across the national newspapers like my own paper, the Telegraph and the Guardian and the Times and so on. And we'll be feeding stories into that so that hopefully we can continue this great journey that the ZCA has begun. And with that, I will pass on now to Yvonne, I think is coming next. And after that, Maggie. Yvonne.
Richard, thank you so much for handing over the baton. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really an honor to be on this incredible platform, which shares such a strong message on the topic of conservation across the Zambesia region, but also across the entire continent of Africa. As earlier shared, my name is Yvonne, and I'm a publicist by profession. I'm currently running a comms consultancy out of the Dubai market. My move to the UAE stemmed 8 years ago, and I was coming fresh out of Zambia, and previous to that was in a good bit of time spent in Victoria Falls, where I was I obviously had the privilege of working in some of the wildlife areas, you know, in the region, and moving into the UAE in a place that is obviously filled with a huge expat community, 200 plus nationalities from across the globe that all converge and call the UAE home. There's a lot of disposable income, and what became apparent to me working in the media space is that is, in as much as there's a lot of nationalities that call this place home, there's still a lot, there's a content gap in as far as information as it relates to what's happening in Africa, what's happening on the travel scene, destinations that people can visit, places to go, and conservation efforts that are in some of the communities that are across our continent. And so Travel Essence magazine, which I am the founder of, and it's published by our consultancy, Narratives PR, is dedicated to that. Our magazine was founded as a call to action, a personal call to action, of which we've had an incredible team that just jumped on the bandwagon to promote the good news that comes out of our continent, there is not enough information in our region. People want to go, people want to experience, people want to see and interact with some of our communities, but there just is not enough information in mainstream media. And so that's what we did. We wanted to sort of bridge that gap as personalities in the media space. And so there's no greater time as now to be able to do that. While COVID has ravaged the tourism industry greatly, what we found as Travel Essence Magazine is it's also created an opportunity for us to connect the expat community, clients and travelers of high disposable income to the African story, to the conservation story, to the sustainable tourism story. And so my call to you all really on this call is to encourage you all to share as much information as you can, leverage any industry players in the media space that you have to help propagate information and foster the messaging, drive the messaging, because it's really, really important. We've got lots of really wealthy personalities that call this place home of frequented. And if only they knew what their contributions could do, what their donations could do across Africa and across Africa's sustainability and environmental conservation story, they would participate. I say this with full confidence because I've had the pleasure of running some incredible campaigns, destination marketing campaigns, working with government entities, CSR initiatives. What they need is information. And so the likes of Richard and myself and Maggie are on this platform because we do want to encourage you, and it's an open invitation for you to please reach out to us so we can support you in pushing the message regardless of what entity you run, initiatives you're a part of. If there's any way we can support you, our readership, our viewership, our access to different media outlets, top tier media outlets, access to influencers in the conservation space really goes wow and really goes far to drive the message. So thank you again for this incredible opportunity to share what you can do. Please do reach out. If not to ourselves directly, please reach out to Luke, and I'm sure Luke will connect you all to us, and we can talk about how we can support everything that you're doing. Tell more stories. Tell more enriching stories on what's happening on the continent, the personalities behind, the benefits that the communities are finding, the critical milestones, whether it's governments that are involved, whether it's law enforcement that have some amazing milestones to share. Those are the kind of messages that we need to share. You know, gone are the days where we have to wait for international media to promote our stories. It begins with us. It begins with those of us that have a passion for this topic, which is very, very vital to a legacy creation and the sustainability of future generations. Do reach out. We're here to support you. And it's more than an honor for us to be able to do that for you. Handing you over to my colleague, a special friend, Maggie, of Travel Africa Network. She will take over and share a little bit about Travel Africa Network and how you can also share content to her and her network in supporting the great cause. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Yvonne. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Maggie, as Yvonne has introduced me. I am based in Cape Town, South Africa. I am the founder and director of a brand new broadcast, international broadcast TV channel called Travel Africa Network. We just recently signed a contract with the European telecommunications satellite company, Eutelsat. They're based in France, and it's one of the biggest satellite companies in the world. And I'm very excited to say for the first time in Africa, we'll be launching into 135 million homes in the Western Europe, the Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. And that's obviously covering about 135 million homes and luxury hotels. A part of the projects that we do is that we have curated or we have put together various topics on promoting or marketing Africa as a destination, and that varies from culinary experiences to luxury lodges and hotels, adventure activities, luxury experiences, and conservation. We see that obviously from the talk here, but we know that the human interactions with wildlife are a defining experience of human existence. And these interactions can be either positive or negative. And human and wildlife conflict has obviously led to the extinction of or the reduction of numerous species and unaccountable human death, as well as huge economic losses. And the recent advances in our understanding of human and wildlife conflict have led to a growing number of positive conservation and coexistence outcome. And in the case of Africa, a lot of the game reserves and national parks are located very close to local villages and communities, and there are various lodges and camps located either in the reserve and national parks. And we see that there's an understanding that human-wildlife conflict has significant consequences for human health, safety, welfare, as well as biodiversity and ecosystems health. And I like to think of people who are dedicated to contributing to the well-being of our parks and animals and communities as the doctors and nurses of nature, because they mend all of Mother Nature's wounds and prevent possible catastrophes. And without these partnerships between nature's doctors and nurses and lodges and parks, I believe there's no such thing as conservation. So we as Travel Africa Network, we produce about 700 hours of content per month. And as an international tourism broadcast media company, we have allocated or sponsored a percentage of our broadcast airtime dedicated to pushing conservation, the conservation narrative, and just basically highlighting the challenges communities, lodges, camps, and wildlife parks are facing. But also there are a lot of success stories on conservation in Africa that need to be told and celebrated. I just came back from a trip in Botswana a week ago, about a week and a half ago, at a lodge called Koro Camp. And it was quite inspiring to learn or to witness, when partnerships between government and a lodge in a game reserve and a community nearby can do. They've just put together a 30-kilometer fence, high-tech fence, one of the best actually that have ever been done in Africa. And that has resulted in obviously making sure that the human and wildlife conflict between the community and the park is eliminated. So in other words, elephants are not going to be able to travel into the community and eat their fruits and vegetables or whatever they grow in the region. And also, therefore, people are not going to cross over into the national park to poach animals. So that was quite inspiring for me to be there. The launch of that event of that event, and yeah, it was quite inspiring. So the conservation story of Africa is not given a lot of exposure because I think a lot of journalists are not willing to travel to a remote location in order to do a story on conservation and human and wildlife conflict. And as we as Travel Africa Network, we see a gap and we are moving in to close that gap in order to make sure that the conservation stories are told and the world is educated on the importance of conservation and the survival of humankind. So thank you so much for your time.
Talks like Conservation Kabunga is vitally important, not just for conservationists, but also for community. And as our decreasing habitat and wildlife loss over the planet and species going extinct, we need to collectively, as people, understand that we need to work with this ecosystem and this environment and take care of this environment, because if we don't take care of this environment, it's going to be a mirror reflection on ourselves and our own destruction going forward, as we all know. So it's a time of change where everybody needs to step in and make that impact so we all can prosper and for the next generation to also flourish.
The urgency at the moment through conservation, throughout all the organizations that we are currently working with, is that we need to protect these wild spaces. We need to stop encroachment, we need to stop the snaring and the bushmeat trade and the ivory trade, the rhino horn trade, pangolin scales. So it is vital that we educate, it's vital that we preserve wild spaces, it's vital that we all work together, and also to create employment, because empty stomachs have no ears. If we do not create employment for people that are adjacent to parks, we are currently doomed.
If you look at the word ecology, what it actually means is it's partnerships. And I don't think there's probably a person in the world today that can actually deny the fact that we are somehow not living in partnership with the earth around us. I think the pandemic this year has been in many ways a clanging gong, if you like, a warning sign. There's been multiple warning signs up until now. And I think the pandemic is a sure sign that we are out of partnership. We need to reconnect with the sacred attitude that we have to conservation and nature.
Thank you, Maggie, Richard, and Yvonne. Your leading role in your own individual capacities, but as part of the ZCA media team, is incredibly invaluable to all those on the front line for conservation in the Zambesia region. I would like to encourage all our ZCA outreach partners to use this incredible force for controlling the narrative for our region around conservation. Please reach out through us at any time with your inspiring must-tell stories.